Hello everyone and welcome back to the Music Roundup. This week I'm going to start by talking about a few updates, so just to keep you in the loop about what's going on at St Saviour's. You'd be forgiven for thinking that not much is happening at the moment, but actually quite a few things have happened in the last week which you might be interested in. To begin with, I want to thank Dr. Richard Martin for writing in and saying that he enjoyed some of the videos that he'd found, some of the previous Music Roundups. Dr. Richard Martin is an electromagnetic design engineer, and we're not quite sure how he stumbled across these videos, but that's great news that these have started to spread, not just around the community of St Saviour's Church, but also further afield. Brilliant news. I also want to thank John in Kansas City, John Braun, and William Cooper Bailey, who's one of our regulars. They've also kindly written in with appreciative comments for me, and that makes a big difference. Now, we've received some donations towards music at the church, both for projects happening at the moment, which I'll explain in just a bit, and also for music in the coming year. And I want to thank Patricia Calmels, who I met at Sally's Curry Club back in February. She's given a very generous donation, which is going to help us to get plumbing done for a humidifier for the organ. And the organ project is very nearly finished, but it's at this tantalisingly close stage where at the moment it's very close to being finished, but there's still some crucial work to get to that stage of wrapping up the whole project. And one of those things is putting the humidifier, which keeps the organ regulated. An organ needs a certain level of humidity, and essentially if that's not granted to it, then you need to do more maintenance work to keep it in good condition. So this is like an investment. Having a good humidifier means less attention needs to be given and less work has to be done on the organ to keep it maintained. And the humidifier requires a plumbing system, and thanks to Patricia's donation, the plumbing is going to be done this Monday, which is absolutely fantastic news and a real breakthrough for the end stages of the project. And that means then that the organ builders can get on and finish the last few things, which is to install 2 ranks of reed pipes, tuning, voicing, putting the digital things onto the organ, and then we're also looking into replacing the blower, and that funding will come out of the organ fund. There happens to be the exact amount left in it to cover that. So we're really looking at the end of the journey on this project, and I hope that that means that come September, or whenever we resume in the church, which of course is uncertain, we'll have the organ back up and running. Now, I made a mistake in the previous video. I talked about Corpus Christi being our patronal or dedication festival. That was an error. In fact, that is the 12th of July instead. And I was partly confused because we had a Corpus Christi service on Zoom with photos of last year's dedication festival featured at it, and of course I didn't work at St Saviour's last year, so I mixed up the occasions. But that's relevant partly also because we are creating a project for the Patronal Festival, which is going to involve making a short video, and I'm going to be working on that over the next few weeks. And we're hoping it's going to feature the choir in a socially distanced recording. So there's a few things to look forward to. So look out for that around then, mid-July. Another date for the diaries is 8th of July, part of Southwest Fest, which is taking place online this year. I'm going to be giving a concert in St Saviour's Church, which you're free to attend virtually over Zoom. So that's the 8th of July at, I believe, 8 PM, but I will put a link to that in the video description. So that's a few things to update you. Another big breakthrough of the last week, in fact, is that we received generous funding from an application I made to the Westminster City Council to pay for a new member of music staff at St Saviour's, who will be working on the Sing After School Music Outreach Club, which we've been doing online. When that resumes in situ, we'll have a new member of staff to work with the children, which will mean to be able to divide into groups, being able to really cater to the individual needs of the children and also to grow the club. And part of that is then to try and attract more children into the junior choir who sing alongside our professionals and volunteers. And that same new member of staff will also sing as an extra soprano choral scholar in the choir. So we're looking at 5 choral scholars in the coming year, one of whom will have this specialist role in outreach. And that's a really exciting thing for the growth of music at the church. I'm going to be talking a bit over the next month about funding for next year's music and a few of the projects that that's going to contribute to. I think in the coming year there's going to be a really charitable element of paying for professional musicians. In the last year it was perhaps a bit of a privilege to be able to do so. In the coming year, when especially larger venues in London and elsewhere won't be able to open for a while, musicians will really desperately need this work. So it's not just because it's a nice thing to be able to pay musicians to do concerts or play in services, but actually an element of keeping that industry alive, because it's really on the brink of collapse. Anyway, that's enough said about that. Now on to some music for this week, and at this time of year we are able to choose a bit more freely because there aren't so many festivals or particular dates. Easter is over, Ascension's gone by, Pentecost and Trinity have happened, so now we're in the Sundays after Trinity, second Sunday after Trinity, and a bit of free choice. So I've just chosen a few pieces of music that I thought you might enjoy listening to. The first is Palestrina, his Missa Papae Marcelli, and I've chosen the Sanctus from this. Now, this Mass setting is shrouded in myth and legend, so some of what I say may be tenuous, but it's fascinated audiences and musicologists and musicians for centuries. In 1562, the Council of Trent happened, and the Reformation had happened about 50 or so years earlier. The Council of Trent was, in some way, the Catholic Church's response to the Reformation. So it was a way of reforming the Catholic Church from within, rather than setting up a new church, which Martin Luther hadn't intended to do, but ended up happening. And I'm not going to try and talk about history, because that's not an area of expertise for me, but I'll talk about the musical implications of that instead. Now, what had happened up to this point was composers were writing settings of the Mass, particularly in Rome and the rich Italian cities, with various themes. And you may have seen in the course of the last year that we did Mass settings with certain names that were connected to motets. For example, on All Saints, we had Victoria's Agnus Dei from Missa Oquam Gloriosum, named after a motet that he also wrote, and that the Mass takes extracts of the music in the motet and then puts them into the words of the Mass. So it gives the Mass a name. Now, one of the things that they objected to in the Council of Trent was the fact that composers were not only taking themes from motets they'd written, but also from secular pieces of music. For example, in English Mass settings, there's the Western Wind Masses by Tye and Taverner and Shepherd. So it's taking a madrigal or a secular piece for choir that was about a wind. And the fact that these songs were associated with raucous pub gatherings and things really didn't take too kindly with the authorities of the Catholic Church. Now, it becomes a bit tenuous, but it's said that they also objected to the fact that Mass settings were written in polyphony, meaning that the music fits together horizontally with imitation, counterpoint, and very intricate and complicated textures, which for a music lover is the joy of the style, but for someone who's a lot stricter about the simple text, or about the ease of the text being heard by listeners, you can see why they would object to that particular style of music. Now, here's where it gets a bit tenuous. According to some sources, there was an event in 1565 when 7 cardinals gathered together in a room, I think the Papal Chapel in Rome, and there was a choir there with Palestrina, and they sang 3 settings of the Mass, and the 3rd setting was this one, Missa Papae Marcelli, which by the way is named after Pope Marcellus II, I think, who was Pope for about 3 weeks at a certain point in 1562. And according to the legend, they were won over by the 3rd Mass, by this Papae Marcelli. because it's a lot more restrictive with the amount of polyphony. That's to say that quite a lot of the time the choir sings in a block texture where you hear the words more carefully, more easily. Now, we can't be totally sure whether this happened or not, or whether even it's true that this particular setting of the Mass won them over, but at the very least we do know that singing of Masses in Renaissance polyphony style wasn't downright banned, certainly not in the way that it was in this country by Edward VI. So Palestrina is, whether he deserves it or not, credited, thanks to this particular piece, with saving the polyphonic style in the Renaissance Mass. And he said, again, this may well not be true, he said that the theme of the Sanctus was sung to him in a dream by an angel, perhaps a bit of a selling point for this Mass. And it was even turned into an opera called Palestrina in the early 20th century by Pfitzner, who is a composer who's gone very much out of fashion because of his association with Nazi Germany. But that particular opera tells the narrative of all this essentially pretty tenuous mythology about Palestrina and his role in saving that musical style. Well, we're going to move on to another piece now. I've chosen a piece by Judith Weir, who's the master of the Queen's music, so she's the sort of official composer of this country. And it's an anthem in the style of a madrigal. So I mentioned earlier madrigals being pieces for secular choirs, often sung in a social environment such as a pub or tavern. And I think one of the things that makes it a style is the fact that it's written in verses, perhaps with variations. And Virtue is the name of the piece, with words by George Herbert. It's part of a collection of 3. It starts with a very simple texture between 2 voices, and then it becomes more elaborate. And one of the things that I admire about this piece is the fact that the harmony sounds as if it contains more than 4 parts, when actually it's very cleverly written for only 4 different voice parts. So there's an immense level of craftsmanship that's gone into the composition to make it sound a lot more detailed than the ingredients that the composer really has at her disposal. And then finally for this video, I thought for a change I'd choose a piece that's not a piece of church music at all. I've chosen a song by the American composer Samuel Barber, who's a major figure of American classical music in the 20th century. And it's called Sure on This Shining Night, written with words by James Agee, I think that's how you pronounce it. He's written a volume called Permit Me Voyage, and this is just an untitled lyric from it. Barber found the words and enjoyed it and created this iconic song, which I once remember hearing the great American singer Renee Fleming performing at the BBC Proms in the Albert Hall as an encore back in 2017, and I was pretty blown away by the captivating ending of the song in particular, the way that it sinks down to this very sublime low note for the soprano voice. Now there's an anecdote that comes with this song, which is that many years later, it was written in 1940, but years later in 1979, Samuel Barber apparently managed to make the song famous using this particular anecdote, which I'm not quite sure I believe. What it says though is that he moved into a new apartment in New York, and he went out and then had to call his apartment to get hold of his partner who was there, and he couldn't remember the phone number of the new apartment. So he called up the operator, told them his name and said he wanted the number of his apartment. And apparently the operator refused to give it to him, and then she admitted that she really liked his song, Sure on This Shining Night, and asked him to prove his identity by singing the first line of it, which he then did, and so she gave him the phone number. Now, that's the sort of story which, it's kind of funny, but I'm not really sure I believe it. But somehow that anecdote helped him to promote that song and make it a staple of his repertoire, of the repertoire in fact. And Samuel Barber is really an important composer of song, especially in that era. So I think you might enjoy it. I've chosen a recording by Barbara Bonney and Malcolm Martineau, which I enjoyed on YouTube, and I hope that you enjoy listening to it too. Thanks for tuning into the Music Roundup this week, and I will look forward to being in touch again in the coming weeks.